it's pretty
No.
cool, but it can get harsh. But we have a window, so we can survive. You know, like most of the time I
Yeah.
used to be in studios, it was like I don't know, a hole underground, and having a big window like that really in winter is very much appreciated.
Yeah.
You know,
I worked in a studio in Philadelphia
yeah.
for a while, and it had no windows, so you never knew what time of day it was except if you looked at your watch, and it didn't have clocks. So like you would just be working, and you'd come in at like 6 in the morning,
Yeah.
and then leave at like 9 p.m. at night. So like the transit, like you, the last time you saw the world, there was a sun,
Yeah, I mean,
and you would leave pitch black outside. It was so weird,
that's a
you
weird
know?
feeling, but that's a very kind
Yeah.
of old school studio like vibe. Like it just these
Mhm.
spaces that were, I don't know who, like what was with the design of it. Of course, like some of were great sounding rooms, but it is no sunlight. You know, it's I mean,
No, they
not the
just want you
best.
to focus on your job
Yeah,
and
exactly.
make the record labels
Yeah,
money.
yeah, exactly. Okay, thanks for doing this. I mean, I'm really excited because it's about knowing to know to get to know the cool people behind the gear. It turns out it's
Yeah.
like interesting gear is actually made by interesting people, and also boring gear by boring people. So, and the Zulu is definitely not, and the other products like the DI is definitely like not a boring piece of gear. It's totally the contrary. So yeah, I mean,
No, not too
I
boring.
would expect like cool stories and stuff. So thanks for joining.
Hmm. Not a
Um,
problem.
yeah, man. I want to start like talking about your early connection with music, like an audio gear, like your first experiences with that.
In terms of using it or
I
creating it.
mean, just first like your early connection with music as a child, and then like how you started
Oh,
actually recording and working with music.
as a kid, because of my mother, God rest her soul, she passed in February. Um, I grew up listening to vinyl records from every sampling of musical genre you could imagine, from Miles Davis' "Bitches Brew" to "Band of Gypsies" by Jimi Hendrix, James Brown, Jim, you know, let's see, the Mamas and the Papas, Elton John, Simon and Garfunkel, Parliament, right? Um, Anything you could imagine that everybody listened to in the 70s kind of like washed over into my life because I was born in 77. So like
Yeah.
all of the eclectic music and, like the Great American Songbook, as it's called, all of the writers like Dylan and the performers like Aretha Franklin, like they were my songbook. So the quilt of my life, so to speak. So when I was exposed to music, it was with a guide, right? Like my mother was very good about not just letting you listen to something and make your own decisions, but also being there as like a person to provide sage advice and talk to you about like, well, this is why the artist sings about these things. Like the first time I heard Bob Marley, my mother was very good about, in Jamaica, there are challenges in their society that these people are trying to overcome. And Bob Marley is kind of like a voice
Yeah.
for the voiceless in his community and in his home country. And through his music, it brings a greater lens to the struggles that people are going through in Jamaica, but also to uplift the people in Jamaica to get them motivated. And that was my first time, like, really understanding that, like, my civil rights heroes and a lot of the musicians in America were very similar in terms of they just had different means of communicating their messages, but music was a platform to reach people and to get them to see the light on things that might not be clear to them. And so that was very impactful for me, was realizing how transformative music was at an early age.
Yeah, that's great. Great education, like
Mm-hmm.
early on, and like the general picture. So yeah, I mean, it's great when parents actually just not just put music there, just explain and aid the connection and help the connection, help understand and deepen that relationship. So
Mm-hmm.
great for your mother. I try to
Mm-hmm.
do the same with my
Thank
girls.
you.
So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
going through that at the moment.
Me
And
too.
what about like actual
Mm-hmm.
recording? I read something about your uncle and like recording in a studio when you were just a kid, right, or a teenager or something like that.
Yeah, very early age, 1993. Uh, First experience, not seeing analog tape because I grew up with a reel-to-reel recorder in my house,
Yeah.
like a consumer one that everybody had because they didn't have cassettes widespread at that time, and my mother bought one. But that was my first experience with actually recording to analog tape in a professional setting and realizing that, like, how do I put this? For me, what changed was, I guess the equivalent of it would be if you're old enough to remember VCRs, right? Um, when you have a VCR in your house, you just use it. You don't have to understand how it functions or why it does what it does. It's just a form of entertainment.
Yeah.
And so by joining the studio world, I began to, oh my God, like I didn't know you could change the way tape machines work, by choice,
Yeah.
or you could fix them. I thought that when something broke,
That's it.
that was it, or you sent it to the repairman. And I wasn't really aware of just how connected practitioners were to the equipment that they used, especially with analog tape, and just how educated you had to be to work on music. Maybe not necessarily as a musician, nothing against them, but just in terms of my uncle came from the time where you went to school for engineering. You were not self-taught. Typically, if you wanted to work in a commercial studio like he did before he opened his own independent facility. So he had an education. He was from New York City. He was in New Jersey, but he went to school in New York City and then settled in New Jersey. Excuse me. So he was very well versed in, these are the mechanisms, these are the things that make it work. But I want to see what you can do with this information because, I know, like, I had talent for music, and I only really saw studios once I realized you could get into them even if you weren't famous. I only wanted to go into the studio to make my own music. I was selfish. It was a selfish interest, right?
Yeah.
Everybody wants to, grow their own career when they're first starting out. And he was like, well, no, like musicians come and go, but people that record them and people that are there to provide this service to them eat forever, basically is what he called it. And so he taught me the technology of recording along with the technique of it. And it changed my life, because everything that he showed me is simplified now, right? So I'll give you a good example. I learned on a Roger Lynn MPC 60 by Akai, which was the first widely known sampling drum machine sequencer, right? And it had a screen like this big, right? With a single line of text, and you would turn a jog wheel to modify the parameters, right? And the manual was like this thick for one piece of equipment in the studio. And he taught me that, right? And now, if you're 16 years old, you open a copy of Fruity Loops, which is a fantastic piece of software for music creation, or Ableton. And the program damn near does everything for you. Back then, you had to do math. Just to sample something or sequence it in time. Like, how many bars equates to this many samples at this tempo? Wait, I changed the pitch. Now everything modified. It was like algebra making beat. And so it really began to click for me. I'm like, wow, like this is something that is more than just a creative outlet. It's science. And once I realized that I could approach music like science and marry that to the creative, I connected with it very differently. It felt more like a lifelong pursuit rather than just this is what cool shit looks like behind the scenes. It was more like, wow, like you almost could become like a college professor and work in a recording studio and be exposed to people that are creative and cooler than you, right? And because you have a brain, because you have knowledge, you're useful to them. And so that was like, wow, a segue to Hollywood just for being fucking smart. Like, yes, I'm with it. I'm a smart kid. I've always been a nerd, from a little kid. And, I connected with that immediately. I was like, yeah, like this is the way for me to get in the door. And it just took off from there. Cause I always was like, whenever there's a problem in a studio, the person that has the solution gets the extra chicken, basically. So I was really well fed for a long time working in studios because I always had a solution.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a problem anymore with the digital world as it used to be.
No.
But then again, like jumping into digital, do you feel something like was lost in this process, like regarding the art of recording, producing, or is it more like your vision is more there's advantages to digital as well, or are you just are you nostalgic about those times, or are you finding ways to integrate both worlds? What's your take on that?
Well, my background educationally is in philosophy and computer science. I'm a person that thinks a lot about the way people look at the world, along with ways to take ideas and turn them into code.
Amazing.
And so, because I'm a big fat nerd, right, I'm going to reference Star Trek. Even in the future, people read books, physical books.
Yeah.
They actually turn the page, you know, Moby Dick, Oliver Twist, right? Les Miserables, you know, like whatever, right? Tale of Two Cities. Even when they didn't have to, you could just look at a screen, right? And I always remember that the tactical, physical, tangible aspect of your world impacts your ability to imagine things that are beyond you. And what I mean by that is what you can see, touch, and feel feeds the vision and the subconscious, right? And what you cannot never enters it. It's always an unknown, right? This is why we have museums full of dinosaur statues, because without them, we would be like, what the hell is a dinosaur, right? You know, bones, like, so they have to show you the animal so your imagination can fill it in, right? In the recording world, when we took away the manual physical interaction of creation, right? It's the same thing as saying to a potter, you don't need to touch clay anymore. You don't need to form this ball into a vase and then push it down and wet it with the slip. And all that is gone now. You don't even need to, you just 3D print pots now. That takes the artist out of the art, right? And it also takes away what I call the routines, which is, you know, code speak, but it's really, we call it neural pathways in the brain. It takes away the ability for us to develop those routines of thinking, which feed imagination away. So now, instead of making music, I tell people all the time, recording engineers are really computer technicians now. We're not actually working on music the way that our ancestors or even our predecessors did, but we're also not connecting with the process the same way. So in terms of what was lost, well, a piece of equipment is only as good as the person operating it. But I also feel like equipment is like a book, right? You connect to a book, it changes your life. You don't connect to the book, your life is unchanged, right? Like we've all read Romeo and Juliet. And romance forever is always ingrained in our mind through Shakespeare. The same thing is true the first time you touch a LA2A. And you realize the faceplate is warm because there's something alive in there. You understand what I'm saying? And it's almost like you're connecting with and bending the universe when you mess with a piece of tube equipment for the first time, because it's just, it's black. How does electricity do something like this, right? And then it lights up and it glows and it generates heat. Like it's like the closest we get to science fiction in the recording world is working with analog equipment. And so when you don't have that connection to your gearing, and gear now becomes code, and code now becomes something that you can't really interact with the same way with equipment, I feel like it actually impacts the creative process for the engineer, not just the musician. Like the engineer themselves is not necessarily thinking the same way that they would when, you know, like, for example, if you're doing a recording session and you had to record a drummer and the drummer requested 17 channels of drums, have 17 high quality microphones, right? You only had several because the studio didn't want to spend a lot of money on condensers. And so you had to make up the difference with SM57s and other kick drum mics that were for like your live rig or something like that. Figure out something and experiment differently than if the answer is already in front of you and solved and it, right? So that creative problem solving aspect is gone now in a lot of ways, right? Because if you ask a young age, we don't have enough mics, they'll be like, well, you should just go buy some, right? Instead of, well, no, what about that public address microphone from the old Burger King when they called the orders out? What if that works good on front of kit, right? You'll never
accident.
do that because you're always
Yeah,
just looking for the easy answer.
yeah,
So I
absolutely.
feel that's what's missing now.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched two key points, which I completely share. One is about the neutrality, the supposed neutrality of equipment and gear and stuff. It's not neutral. It impacts what we do. And so, if there's a designer there, if there's a physical connection, if there's a movement with your hands, with your body, if it exists in the real world, it's going to impact what you do. And most of the
Mhm.
plugins, if you there, it's not completely neutral. It's not a bunch of numbers in the screen. There's looks, and they're generally imitating looks of the real gear. So there's the answer. It's just a downgraded version in this sense of the real world. And you mentioned something else, which is limitations, right? When you have limitations, you get creative with them, with the tools that you have, and you go into new spaces. And it's also this idea in digital world, especially, that having more options equates to automatically equates to greater creativity. And it's not necessarily the case. In general, like look at the guitar with its limitations. How long are we going with the guitar? You know, it's irregularities and it's like kind of irregular nature, and we're still going and squeezing it out. And just infinite instruments maybe push you into less creative areas because it's too much, I guess, and humans
Yeah.
don't relate to that. It's something you take into consideration when you design, like the how many features I'm gonna put in, as opposed to how creative, like how do you like corner a limitation and say, okay, will exist in this world, so that people are forced to using it and pushing it. It does the limitation factor enter your mind, like when you design?
I believe because I have this background of expanding and expounding on things from the philosophical sense. I had to write a lot in college, so I had to spend a lot of time in the English department and the philosophy department. And so the best way I can explain it for me is that I come up with every single thing that a piece of equipment that I'm designing can do. And then initially, sometimes the gear, if you'll forgive the phrase, will tell me what it's best at, right?
Yeah.
And there are too many instances where engineers will say, oh, if only you could get between these two places, or if you could modify this tipping point, or push this curve this way, and it impacts this. But what I end up doing is I'll have like a bucket of choices, right? And what I try to do is think about me, and maybe this is it's a very specific and particular approach, but I always try to think about, like, how would I use this piece of equipment in a session, right? So I'll give you a great example of Prime. Prime has, let's see, so here's like a Prime faceplate, right? So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 choices for Prime, but they're static choices. They're not variable, right? So more likely than not, like a video game, you can just push 3 buttons in and leave it alone, and that's it. Some equipment has very limited choice parameters for application and use, and I appreciate that quite a bit, right? But I also learned that psychologically, the equipment being the way that it is also tells you how to use it, right? So when a piece of equipment has a lot of features, the idea is the equipment, I believe, through the designer, like I almost, like I said, gear is like books, right? Like, what is the author trying to tell us, right? We all heard that when we were in school. Here's the paragraph. What is the author trying to communicate? What is James Joyce saying in Ulysses? Yeah. So I'll be like, all right, this piece of gear has so many features because it's very flexible, right? So like Prime is designed to be a solution for giving you different flavor palettes for your conversion.
Yeah.
Right? Well, we all say, well, what converters should I get next? Or this system has these transformers and that's going to give me the sounds I want. And I said, damn, if only you could get all that in one unit and be like, now I got, I have schizophrenic converters. I can have converters with multiple personalities. And so you need more choice parameters because of that to be able to give you a curve like this, or, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But that's not how it always works. Like the DI box is another one where it's just like, look, I'm going to make some very hard choices for you.
Exactly.
just like the people that recorded Motown had to deal with.
Yeah.
And this is it, right? You need more gain if you want this flat curve at 50K.
Yeah.
You need less gain if you want this exaggerated curve at 12.5. And you got two choices to thigh and slink, you know, bird grease and slink. And, you know, and what I realized is that each piece of gear that you look at that way, it has to be about what is the story the equipment is trying to tell you in that moment, right? A DI box with flexibility still has to be a fast, on-the-go thing because that guy's recording. You know, that lady, Carol Kay, is on bass and she just has to get right to it. She's like, I need that thing right there. Bam, right? And then you just go, right? You know, I can think of when Alan Evans recorded Mono Neon with the Motor City DI box in Iceland. And they just would turn the knob and he'd be like, I like that one. And then would just go.
Exactly.
And then the engineer's job is like, okay, I need less preamp gain or I need more. And that's it.
Absolutely.
Right? That's a perfect marriage for a musician. But an engineer's tool where he or she may be sitting down with the producer and the producer's like, I want something that's more aggressive. Right? What do you got? Okay. Normally the engineer would say, well, I can pull up a bunch of plugins and bring this out after we record it. And the producer's like, no, I want to guarantee that this is the sound we're going to get. So that's why something like Prime is like, all right, I'm going to put this in this preset and then go for it. So I think the answer is, long story long, is it depends on what the gear is designed to do, right? Like Zulu has 4 controls plus 1 per channel. It has deck, bias, enhance, headroom, and calibration. Plus we added a dark bright control to bias. And for me, it was like, I've always designed that piece of gear. I'm sure you're going to ask me about this later, but that gear wasn't designed for mixing originally. It was designed for tracking.
Yeah.
That's why there's less choices, because it's really more of almost like a musician's tool where it's like, I want to go click, 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 click up, bam, let's go, you know, and, or set it and forget it kind of thing. But still, people still look at that like that's a lot of choices. I think it depends. Plugins have spoiled us with presets big time. Where we don't want to make an effort at all to get our sounds. And so that's why, for me, a long time ago, when it comes to this choice thing, and then I'll stop, I realized that engineers were a dying breed, and they were being replaced, believe it or not, by musicians. Musicians have replaced engineers. They just happen to touch the equipment now. We used to not be allowed to touch gear if we were like, get your fucking hands off my console. They didn't let you touch it, even if you were paying for time, right? Now musicians have their own studios in a larger scale, and they don't mind 50 million 11 guitar pedals. Oh, well, this reverb does this sound, and this decay does that sound, and this delay, if I feed it into this distortion and then feed that distortion into my... They love to turn knobs and tweak until this cows come home, right?
Absolutely.
And I started designing gear for musicians, and guess what? They outnumber engineers now.
Yeah, I mean...
Sorry, you know?
I'm a musician that grew into engineering and producing. I know nothing about voltage, electrons, and stuff like that. I know, like, the basic
Most engineers don't.
I mean... I guess so, but yeah, I really feel like the Zulu and the DI, the Prime, I still haven't tried it, but both of these pieces of gear are made for people like me that are musicians that are recording and just want like drastic decisions, things with personality. I have to think about a song. I have to think about a performance. I have to think about like that everyone's having fun, the psychological part. I just want to turn knobs and, you know, find something special. Especially when I'm running like a larger session here, like with, I don't know, 6, 7 musicians. And I wanted to have character. And I want the musicians to, that are playing, to react to the actual sound and not like doing stuff after the fact. So I think that's, but I still think that the Zulu is in this like very good zone where you can still do a lot. It's not a one-trick pony at all. You can use it like...
No.
And that's why I think it got eventually into mixing and even mastering. I've heard like mastering engineers using it parallel and all sorts of applications. So it's not like something, you know, one-trick pony at all. So yeah, I mean, I definitely feel what you say about like gear telling you what it is, how to sound, and like what does the gear want to do. Absolutely. And that leads us into our next topic, which is like this is like for the nerdiest nerds out there, because I want to talk about transformers I mean,
Oh boy.
I want to learn about it because I know I learned a bit just reading for this interview and reading about them and reading about the Transformers. Some stuff I read in a couple of interviews, and I also know just because the Transformers are cool because of course I understand the Neve sounds different from the API and the Transformers are different, and also my V72s, which is like your old mentor, this guy, German guy, Oliver.
Oliver.
Yeah,
Ollie.
yeah. And you learned Transformers from him, right? A lot of stuff from him.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wanted to understand
Yeah.
like what is it about Transformer saturation that is so cool as opposed to, for example, tube saturation? Why is it different? And why is this like the special thing about your products that tends to like dictate everything, right? Like Transformers is a big thing.
Well, for starters, here I gotta
Yeah,
grab something real quick. I'll show you.
yeah.
So, all right. So the thing about Transformers saturation is that it has to be one of the most abused terms
Okay.
when it comes to describing gear.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'll tell you why. This is going to sound very unpopular. Okay.
Give it to me.
The majority of equipment that we associate with the sound of Transformers, you're not hearing the Transformers when you hear the saturation you're describing. I'll give you a great example.
Okay.
The output transformer in a Neve 1073 circuit is designed to handle up to plus 26 dBu. Okay. Meaning over zero. Okay. Not up to zero, over zero. So this output transformer in the Neve can take that much signal level and understand how that converts to voltage, and you realize that we only need to get to like around plus 12. I mean, to get to minus 12 inside our converters, right? You only need 1.28 VRMS, which is minuscule compared to 26 dBu, right? You start to realize, well, wait a minute. When I turn my 1073 up, right, and the output transformer is this and that, I'm hearing distortion. I turn the output down and I hear something breaking up. It's got to be the transformer, right? And in actuality, if you go and look at the circuit, it's actually the output transistor that's saturating. The item that's in the metal can right before the output transformer, a silicon part, is what you're hearing, along with the other transistor stages leading up to that, right? I think they're the 184s or something like that. And when I learned that about the Neve, and I began to realize that the output transformer makes a difference in the way that it performs and sounds, but it isn't the source of distortion that we're associating it with, right? That's when I realized that what a lot of people called the transformer sound was actually something else breaking up in these circuits. It's the tubes in the LA2A. It's the it's the gain reduction element. It's the FET compression inside the 1176 that we're associating with the transformer because that's the buzzword. It's the transformers. It's this, it's that, right? But there's 1176s that don't have transformers and you still get the sound, right? Like the Rev H.
Yeah.
And I began to really delve deep into, okay, so what do transformers allow us to do rather than are they getting picked for a sound or not? And that's when I began to talk to Oliver. And our conversation and my tutelage with him began because of a microphone company that I was part of called JJ Audio Mics many, many years ago. And I went to Oliver because there were parts that were discontinued from the storehouses of some pretty famous microphone companies that were making products still, but you couldn't get replacement parts. And so one of the first interactions we had is I wanted to recreate this classic transformer from a condenser mic. And like many situations where I learned something, I just began to ask questions. And so through him, and then also I have to give a big shout out to another long gone, but still very highly remembered and respected person in my life was Tom Reichenbach. who was the son of Ed Reichenbach. Ed founded Cinemac Transformers. He also was part of the 1176's history, and Tom was his son, right? And Tom would spend hours on the phone with me, teaching me just as much as Oliver did. So I had two big names, you know, who were just very kind, gracious people and would share things with me. And so Oliver was the one, and I'll give him the credit for this intent completely, is he told me that transformers allow us to tell a circuit how to behave. And that was the first time I'd heard that, because it was almost like the way he explained it was, if a transformer is designed the right way or the wrong way, depending on what your purpose is, it will make the circuit react differently. And so I was like, wait a minute. So a transformer is more like a character device, like, you know, telling a circuit how to behave, rather than if I just do this, you'll hear the transformer do something, right? And so where LMI came from was using my own approach to transformer design, but also my selfish intent of, well, I want to make a microphone circuit misbehave on purpose, right? Or I want to hear the tube struggle more because people like that sound, even though they don't realize that's what they're hearing, right? Most circuits are designed to get out of the way. I said, what if we make transformers that are in the way and force the circuit to work harder and give us more energy on the back end, you know, not from the transformer, but from the preceding amplifier ahead of time, right? So the DI box transformer is actually one of the first ones that was like that, where it's like, you know, let me try this really unorthodox approach and load the guitar's pickup way down on purpose with a really high impedance, way beyond anything that, you know, guitars normally ever face, and see what happens. And so what I realized is that, well, what I'm doing is I'm making the pickups work harder. And so they have this sound now, because pickups are inductors and wire too. And that's when it was like, yo, like, it's not about getting transformers to saturate. It's about getting the circuit to get jacked up on purpose. And if you have the right transformer, now you're not blowing something up further down the line. But these transformers didn't exist, so they had to be created, right? So here's the LMI difference. So like, I'll look at a generic transformer from a condenser mic you can go buy at Guitar Center right now. So it's like this big. This is how big it is, right? And this is the size of a transformer. This is from another device, but this is the size of a transformer that I'd put in a microphone. So it's like this big. I'll show you like this. So here's the one from like, you know, your generic Guitar Center mic, and here's mine, right? Now, the majority of this transformer here is plastic. All this white crap and the tape and everything, this is plastic and wire. The metal, which is this part, is very tiny, right? Here's the LMI advantage. All of this is the actual iron. This is all iron, right? This is the plastic, this little bit right here, right? And this little bit right there. But the rest of this box is actually a brick of iron and steel, right? Versus the blue part here, this little bit, that's all you're getting. So when you have less laminations on your transformer, it actually impacts handling ability. It impacts the bass cutoff because your inductance is typically smaller. It also impacts, especially for tubes, how they get loaded. And I was like, you know, I'm looking at the industry and I'm seeing that there's a lot of change going on. You know, this company got bought by that company, and this company is getting put out of business, and all these employees are getting let go and everything else. And I'm like, there's going to be a big gap in the supply chain industry for transformers. And so that's when LMI came about. It was more than just let's make new products. It was like, this is a service that people really need. And I've had tons of clients that need transformers in their gear. Even Handsome Audio, right? Even Handsome Audio became a client of mine, my own business, because we were able to fill the gap for Handsome Audio, not just for Zulu, but for anything beyond Zulu. Like if we wanted to do any other type of hardware, where were the transformers going to come from? From this one or that one? We would be at the mercy of their supply chain. And after a while, it was like, it's better to have a business that is a much more fluid, consistent source with competitive rates, but also with the ability to deviate. Because right now, the major transformer vendors that are out there, a good chunk of their business is tied to specific companies. So that changes their catalog quite a bit in terms of what gets made more often. And this is nothing against them. I'm not criticizing them. I'm just saying if you're a hobbyist or a small boutique company, you may not have room in the production schedule to get things in the same pace that you would with somebody like me that's a smaller business that has less clients. So that's where it was like, I think there's room for this, and I was right. And so, sky's the limit as far as what we can do here with transformers. But the transformer saturation thing is a bit abused and overused.
I mean,
quite a bit.
Apparently, I was one of them, but now I understand. But what are the key elements of the transformers themselves? That is it just the size, amount of turns? Does the material affect at all? Because I read about copper versus nickel and stuff like that. Is that true? Do you take that into consideration, or is it?
Yeah, it really revolves around a very ancient science of magnetism, right? And different materials have more ferrous content and a higher permeability for magnetism, right?
Yeah.
Like the impact of a magnetic field on a piece of lead is very different than one on a piece of pure iron or an alloy like steel, or a mineral like a material like nickel that has a small iron content, right?
Yeah.
These impacts on those particular elements actually change a transformer's behavior. In particular, nickel has a different distortion characteristic than pure steel. Well, steel's not pure, it's an alloy, but steel versus nickel has a lower saturation point than steel does. But nickel also tends to offer a more accurate sonic variable than steel does, because steel is a denser material and rolls off top end, where nickel doesn't. But steel also can handle more bottom end before distortion. So this is why the majority of transformers that have the word nickel in it is a blend of nickel and steel. With LMI, when we use different materials, there's a creative reason behind that. So in most of the microphone transformers that I manufacture, there's always a nickel content to it. I tend to use high Ni, which is high nickel, and I have a special way of going about it where I actually I will use an interleaving technique. Excuse me, sorry. I'll use an interleaving technique where you have, so here you have steel. This is silicon steel, and next to it is nickel, and it's like a mirror. That's how you see that?
Yeah.
That's how shiny my nickel is, right? This comes from South Korea, which is one of the best places to get nickel on the planet, right? And as you can see on the opposite side, the nickel is replacing the I and the E. So like there's an alternating. So if you flip it over, you'll see that the nickel, you see that? It's alternating, right? This actually adds to the sound of the transformer big time. And it's not a secret technique. Other people have done different ways of winding and mounting laminations and all of that. But for me, it was more than just the approach to lamination stacking and things like that. It was the materials themselves. My dad is a chemist, so he knows everything about metal. And that was a big deal for him. He's just like, look, if you're going to get nickel, then like make sure the purity is high and you can tell what nickel content looks like based on the way the nickel appears. And so I wanted something that was extremely high quality nickel. So I had to like really chase down the parts. But as far as materials, there's wire that's silver tip, there's copper wire, there's wire thickness that varies, and that plays into capacitance along with resistance in terms of the number of turns you need to make a transformer function. There's also the measurement of the transformer itself in terms of, well, how do you calculate the impedance of the transformer? What is the dynamic current resistance what is the direct current resistance of a transformer's primary versus secondary, and how does that impact the stage, right? So like a transformer with a lot of, it's called DCR, that's facing the output of a circuit, right? The higher that is, it loads the circuit down and makes it harder to get an output level that you might want. But it also may turn into, now we can drive the output stage a little hotter and get the mojo that we're looking for. Like, for example, there's a classic mic pre that uses an op amp that everybody loves in the studio world, right? I won't say their name, but people have to get pads for the output of that preamp, right? And if you want to overdrive the output section and hit the transformer hotter and all of that stuff, and if you look at it, well, if you can tweak the circuit and rebias it a little bit, if you had a heavier load on the output, then you can kind of drive the output hotter before you start clipping the next device in the chain. And so, you know, those are part of the things that I really focused on, was trying to turn the parts of an amplifier or a circuit like Prime or Zulu into more of an engineer's tool, so that like people could handpick the well, I want this mic to have an LMI transformer because I love the way it makes FET sound, or, you know, and that was when I really like started to realize that the material choices mattered a lot more than I thought they did, because whereas other people are looking at them to try to get the transformer out of the way, I was looking at it like, how can I get it in the way so that it became more of a part of the circuit? And I was successful, and I'm continuing to still examine that. You know, I have more orthodox transformers too, but I love the fun stuff. The funky stuff is my favorite.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest.
I mean, that's what your gear is speaking, right? There's always character. There's always loads of tonal qualities. It's definitely, you hear like the components are getting in the way of something, is not out of the way. Absolutely. So that's why we love it.
Yeah.
I want to just take a small break. I want to reconnect because I'm having some issues here with the Wi-Fi, and we'll be back in a minute. Just 2 seconds.
Still going.
Cool. I want to know something just to close the chapter about Transformers now, but it's really something that hit my mind the other day. I mean, what's the relationship with, how do you get from Transformer to tape? Like, how does the Transformer and your design based on Transformers emulate the tape sound so well? Because it's really, really close. What is about
Some
Transformers?
of it is a secret.
Sorry?
Some of it is a secret, Francis.
I mean, I won't ask.
No, let's kind of like take the lid off the pot for a second. It is no secret, if you have any salt as an engineer, that the head, right, of a tape recorder is an inductive path. It's an inductor, right? A transformer is a pair of inductors that talk to each other and have a conversation, right? There is a physical interaction between magnetic tape and the head of a tape machine. Like, they literally rub, you know, right? This is where sticky shed and all that stuff comes into play too, and this is why you have to clean your tape heads. But tape actually rubs on the head. And as it rubs, there's a charge that gets absorbed by the inductance of the head, if I'm not mistaken. And the way that we tune the electronics to react to the head is where the bias and the calibration factors of a tape machine come from, is because there's a physical process, right, of the rubbing, and also the conversion of magnetism into electricity and electricity into sound. And, you know, studying that for a while, understanding it, but so much, I don't understand it completely. That's a lie. If people think I do, I don't. But in the sense of misunderstanding, right, stumbling my way through this journey like Jesus in the desert, I came upon a solution where I realized that I could actually not modify voltage, which is what a lot of people try to do with tape simulation, but I could modify current in the path that current takes. And so that involved special transformers. The early days of LMI in its infancy was then the creation of the transformers in Zulu. And what I could do was create a circuit that made those transformers oscillate in the same way that there's a carrier wave in a tape machine that triggers the transfer from from the head to magnetic tape. And even though it's passive, the transformers are technically misbehaving in Zulu. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. They're doing the exact opposite. They're not just, taking a 0 and giving you back a 1 in a binary transfer. It's actually more like you're getting a 0 and then you're getting back like a 1.4327896. And then you now have to take a process that's there to take that stimulus, modify it dynamically, and then turn it back into a 1, right? So basically you get a sound source that gives you a ton of really cool stuff, and then there's junk attached to it. But the junk is the extra crap you need to get rid of to get back to the purity. But without a process that creates the junk, you can never get the 1 that I'm going to get. So the transformers were specially designed to give me as much junk as I needed, right? To create this result and then give me enough slop, almost like distilling alcohol, right? So that when we began to correct the course of current and correct the behavior of the transformers, right? Input and output. We wound up with this result where it was like our first try with Zulu. When I first met Todd, this is before Todd was part of what became Handsome Audio. Zulu was basically very distorted and very crunchy. It sounded like early Motown daptone stuff. Like it was very, very distorted. But also it was a fantastic distortion, something that a guitar pedal couldn't do, something that you couldn't simulate with the plugin, and something that no piece of hardware on the market was capable of. Yeah. Like you just couldn't get this sound. So when I began to look at that circuit, that is when I said, well, what if I start doing this with the transformers to get it to do less extreme stuff? And so through the course of 2 years, not only had we developed a signal path that would, still create this behavior, but also we had transformers that were specifically designed to have a wide range of dynamic behavior and a wide range of reactivity to the way you mess with them. So, for example, when you're playing with the calibration control on Zulu, that is literally getting the transformer to do something different in Zulu, along with the entire signal path. Because in order for me to simulate a Ampex 456 style +6 tape formula, I needed something that had a different, let's just say, affinity to bass than something that's wide open, like a +12 tape, right? And that wasn't just frequency response. That was literally the dynamics of it. But it's also very misleading to call Zulu a transformer box, because the transformers are only there, like I said, to be like a speeding car. What type of brick wall is it going to hit? One that's made of cinder blocks, one that's made of stones, right? How will the car crumple? And so that was a big piece of nailing that sound. Was I couldn't find a transformer off the shelf that really that did that. Yeah. And then when I finally had it made, the engineers that were making the transformers initially, before they began to let go of the fact that this was so off the charts, they were like, this is so weird. Like, why do you want transformers that do this? Like, they were really flabbergasted. Like, they were like, why? Like, who wants that? That's not what you're going for. That's not quality. That's not. I was like, exactly. I want something that's going to mess things up on purpose, and then I'll fix it. And they're like, well, how are you going to do that? I'm like, don't worry about it. And so, and this isn't without like auditions. Like, we went through several companies back in the days before LMI existed to get these transformers made. And like, I mean, I had literally people telling me, you are out of your mind. You're crazy. This doesn't make sense. We're not going to do this. I'm not going to put my name on this. I refuse. And so those custom transformers were not only like very time consuming to develop, but eventually, had to at some point or another really be revisited because we started to encounter supply chain problems. And so I actually set out, and when I started LMI, I actually copied my own work to make these transformers. I supply the transformers to Zulu now, right? And it's a 1-to-1. But it took a long time to get them to match because they're so weird. And these little baby transformers, they just do magic stuff. And it doesn't necessarily explain, though, the bigger picture, which is that it's really not about the transformers, in my opinion. It's all about the way you use them. And without that kind of like, well, you plug a wire into here and now you get this, like, well, how can I change that? Instead of it being very textbook and rote and all the above, it wouldn't matter what transformer you use, because if you're not going to deviate from what's safe and what's established, then you would never get here. Yeah. And I mean, I appreciate that people love Zulu in terms of how authentic it is. A lot of people think that it isn't. But I disagree heavily, because I've done way too many 8-person shootouts with real tape machines to show people, look, like, okay, this is what you want. All you got to do is turn it like this. But that doesn't make sense. That's the whole point. Yeah. This isn't about a preset from a plugin company. This is about, the idea is you distort the signal on purpose, right? Like your drum video. The transformers are set this way. They're loading down everything. Everything is crunched, right? And then that magic enhanced control, right? All you do is you take a little bit of the dirt, right? The junk signal, and blend it back in. And then the signal starts to say, hey, calm down a little bit. And you get this magic, juicy, fat sound that is complex. It sounds like you worked really hard on making it. I call it intelligent, iterative tone design. With Zulu, if you just get that perfect marriage between distortion and clean, it sounds like you have 12 things going on at the same time. It's incredible how well that design came together, because I've had like records, huge things, right? And they'll use Zulu and they'll say, this replaced 12 things in my process. Because look at how the bass is sitting. Look at how the voice is sitting in the track. The snare hit's different now. Like, how is this one thing doing all of that, right? And it's because there's like literally like 8 things happening in one channel of Zulu that is not only just something I designed, but I designed it intentionally to be a very organic piece of gear. So that no matter what, if you put a piece of music through Zulu on one setting or a sound, and then you put a totally different sound to that same setting, it sounds totally different. Yeah. Like, it's not one size fits all distortion at all. But the transformers do play a large part, but they're not like the source of the magic, I don't think. I think the magic is just that I'm just not afraid of fucking things up on purpose.
And that's amazing. It does really sound as you describe. It does a lot, and you like it, you don't like it. It's not like this surgical thing. It's just like a massive disruptive thing that will change. You can still use it like subtle in the mix bus application with like the 4 setting. But then again, I think the strongest part is when you just start to really put character into music. And I was listening to, we were before the interview, I asked you to send me some music that inspired you to build Zulu. Sonic wise, and I've been hearing this music, and now we just did a playlist, by the way, and you can download it and just link to Spotify, to streaming services, because we feel it's also important that to listen where the inspiration comes from, and you can actually kind of when you heard your playlist, the Black Rock, Steely Dan, Jones and the Dap Kings, the Goonies, like that crazy movie from the 80s. I just heard Zulu. I just heard like, oh, number 4, you know, kind of 3D distortion and kind of subtle saturation. I think that was in Black Rock. I just felt like this.
Yeah.
It's just soft, but it's not. How would I say? It's still exciting, and it's not. It's just more 3D and a bit of like gelling together, and it really felt like a straight connection to the piece of gear. And also some like the more like also some of the older stuff you sent, like the I think it was one like more like lo-fi. I think it was like early 90s stuff. Like that's there for sure, like in the lo-fi preset. I think it's a Public Enemy track you sent that it sounds
Oh
exactly
yeah.
like that, you know.
Oh yeah.
It's just like, oh
Fear of a Black Planet, man. Like that's
yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Like and I'm really really close friends with Hank Shockley,
Yeah.
who produced that, and he talks about fighting the engineer because they refused to do the sound that he wanted, and he would have to force them to, like, you literally get into a fist fight with them
Oh my god.
because they didn't want to turn this thing up more or like, and you know, I guess one of the reasons why I felt that this, just to put a bow on this, uh, is because in a way, good equipment is like set design for a film, right? And engineers, we live a very lonely life as creatives. I'll tell you why. Because whereas normally you have all these hands and people that work on a movie set that, you know, like when you look at a period piece, like if you're looking at something that's meant to recreate World War II, everybody gets a costume and they have equipment and vehicles and guns, and mud is on the face of the lead actor to show he's been in the trenches and all of that
Yeah.
stuff, right? Engineers and record producers, we start with a blank canvas. Maybe we have an idea in our mind, but it's just really us and those musicians to create that, right? But if
Yeah.
you have a piece of gear that can actually just create a set for you
Yeah.
like that, you know, like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I wanna make a 1960s Burt
Yeah.
Bacharach
Yeah.
record. Like, oh, that's the TK setting on Zulu, and turn it to, you know, right? And then all of a sudden you're there,
You're there.
right?
Yeah.
That was the motivation. Is just like when you listen to these albums, you not only hear the lo-fi, it's like you're in New York City with Public Enemy, right? And like the character of the album tells you what they're going through. You know, this Black hip hop act that's politically motivated and they're militant and they're all about bringing, you know, the voice of Black people to the forefront. Hip hop at the time was not respected. It was very much like banned from a lot of radio stations and television. People couldn't watch rap music on TV. So like these people are bucking the system. They're fighting to be heard, right? And that shit's in the sound of the music.
Yeah.
Like the music literally sounds like war. It sounds like conflict,
Yeah.
right? And that's kind of why, like, people that listen to Public Enemy or Wu-Tang Clan, like, the music is more than just the words and the beat. It's like a setting.
Yeah.
And I felt like, to go back to an earlier question you asked me, I feel like that's gone now.
Yeah.
Where like you cannot listen to a music from a lot of modern productions and it puts you somewhere. Like maybe emotionally it does.
Yeah.
But like it don't put you nowhere. Like you can't see yourself like, oh, I'm in Nice right now. When I hear this, it doesn't take you anywhere. It just makes you feel something, but it doesn't actually make you transmogrify your existence. You know, like when I listen to As by Stevie Wonder,
Yeah.
I feel like I'm in his living room singing that song. Like, I mean, it takes you somewhere.
Absolutely.
Not just emotionally, like you can see yourself with him, you know. Amy Winehouse or Sharon Jones, you know, like you feel like you're somewhere. Like you don't understand how much Brooklyn is in the Sharon Jones stuff. Like so much of that New York City vibe and Brooklyn and in Bushwick and the neighborhoods and the way that the architect, like it's in the music, but it's in the sonics of the music. And like, so like big deal with the playlist for me. That's why I tried to put it very distinct, specific choices.
I love the playlist. It's also great to listen to playlists. I was talking with Pedro, our assistant here. Like, it's so great to listen to all these recordings that have these apps, this aspect of tape, and like this aspect of like sense of time. So I was like, oh, this is early 90s, and or this is like 70s, like Stevie Wonder. And I think like also that was kind of the magic of these equipment pieces. They just
Mm-hmm.
like with one, I think it was majorly the tape, because we still have like, all the same microphones, U47s, whatever. It didn't change that much, but the medium itself, it just, and how everything interacts at that like bottleneck, it just and it's very hard to replicate, to just imprint like with that kind of reality and sense of space and time in modern gear. It's just completely neutral. Maybe in time, like we'll look back and say, oh, that sounds like a plugin from 2000 and tens or some 2020s. But I get the feeling it's not going to be the same. Like this older gear really captures the essence of that time, I feel. So yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
they have been saying. Let me interject this. They have been saying that plugins will replace analog hardware in the next 5 to 10 years
Yeah,
for 30 years.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Like
yeah,
they've
yeah,
been making that claim in 5 to 10 years we'll be there, and then that time passes, and they keep saying the same thing, and it's like maybe you just leave a thing, you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
And I mean, look at it this way: ketchup is one of the plainest seasonings in your refrigerator or house,
yeah,
right? And it's almost 200 years old,
yeah,
and we still use it because there's just no such thing as ketchup except ketchup, right? Um, it is a certain analog gear, like gear that is just special. It just can't be replicated, and you just have to appreciate that. And sorry if you can't afford it, or you can't have 5,000 of them in one session, but that's also not what makes that gear special. It's about appreciating the process
yeah,
and learning to embrace the shortcomings of that equipment. And uh, I do agree with you that tape played a large factor in a lot of ways that those records sounded. But what's also really amazing about recording to analog tape is we all forget this. Like, you were listening to the input of the tape machine when you recorded from the producer's window, from the, behind the control
yeah,
room glass, or the engineer, but you didn't know what the hell that shit was going to sound like until you push play.
yeah,
Right. So the discipline, the practice, you see
yeah,
what I mean about the
yeah,
limitations? Like,
yeah,
we know what everything is going to sound like now
yeah,
in digital. Like, we push a button, or we have zero latency monitoring. If you have like those converters like RME or whoever, everything instantaneously. Like, I know what it's going to sound like. I know
yeah,
if I did it right, I know if I did it wrong. And back then, you couldn't really hear that,
yeah,
right? Your input stage in your deck could sound as clean as in America, we say as clean as a whistle,
yeah,
right? But if your machine wasn't calibrated right, if the heads were worn, or if the tape
yeah.
was bad, when you push play, all that shit you thought you were going to get, you got something totally different. And then you were stuck with it
Oh my
unless
god.
you did another recording. And that's if, right?
Yeah,
So that's part of like the excitement of this, is that, okay, we don't have that limitation anymore. But now I always give this example. Alan Evans from Soul Live, and Alan Evans Trio from Iron Wax, and many, 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 many years of working in the industry. He was the one that showed me, when Zulu was out, that you could put Zulu across your monitoring bus on a mixer or in Pro Tools or whatever, right? If you have like Pro Tools HD or something like that. And he was like, so this is what I do. He said, I take Zulu and I put it on monitoring path so that everybody hears
oh my god.
themselves as if they're going through Zulu, right? And I'm like, I said, oh, that's cool.
Yeah, that's
Like,
amazing.
it's cool that you can hear that. He's like, no, all the musicians hear that. I was
Yeah,
like, wow. So what happens? That they play differently.
yeah.
Like, your
Yeah,
drummer now knows that if he smacks the snare a little bit harder, it has an aggressive thing that happens that he can appreciate.
yeah,
Or the bassist is gonna slap a little different, or the singer when he's doing his scratch take is going to approach it differently. And I was like, wow. He's like, so it actually, one of the things I call Zulu in secret is it's a mood synthesizer, right? That like it changes the way you feel about the music you're making. Yeah. It has an emotional thing. And so you can't do that with a rotate machine. You can't listen live. You can't play and listen live to your recording from tape. You have to like wait. And because of the latency between the two, between the input record and the repro head, a couple milliseconds. So it'd be off. So with Zulu, that's eliminated. It's a zero latency process. There's no DSP in there. And so it just opens up this whole palette of things that you can do as a person managing sessions, like you can in line when you record, or you could just be the producer and say, well, I want to do like a basic mix while they're cutting, on the rhythm bed day or something like that. Absolutely. And so now you got it across your two bus. So you're making decisions based on that. Oh, and the other thing he said that was really wild is he said that because he was listening through Zulu as he produced the whole session, it even impacted where the equipment was set. So he said, I put mics in different places than I normally would because he would be like out in the tracking room with his cans on. And he's like, oh, I don't need to put the snare mic as close as I needed to the hi-hat to get this sound. So now he said it's really crazy. It's like tape as a live process makes it quicker for you to get the results you want. And I was like, wow, I didn't realize I made a piece of gear that was that impactful.
I mean, it is.
I thought it was just like a flavor, that's it.
Absolutely. I've experienced this all the time. So I have to get more. Like the problem is like they get sold. They get to Europe and then we distribute them and people want them and they're in the supply people can't get enough. So we always have two. We need at least 4 if we're tracking because like everyone
we need
every
16, bro.
I know the API. We were thinking about this as soon as we can. We're loading 16, one per channel of the API, and we're tracking everything to Zulu, like the bigger sessions. Forget about it.
Some people do that, and it sounds like it.
Yeah, I mean,
and
it's amazing.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So, Langston, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you also for supporting us because Bloque is really not only a gear store, it's also a recording studio of the old kind. And we're surviving as an old studio that has consoles, real drums being recorded, stuff like that. And one of the reasons is that we're get support from bands and we're allowed to sell their gear and helps us stay doing this. So thanks. And I'm really looking forward to talking more sometime with new developments and new products and stuff that I know you're on.
I have quite a few.
Yeah. Always on to something.
I've been busy. I got one right here. This you're gonna need these.
Oh yeah, I know what it is. I know what it is. That's
the
Zulu
500 series unit.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you guys are gonna want these, baby.
Yeah.
People are gonna go because then they can reclaim the space in their 500 units for the active stuff or whatever.
Yeah.
But those will also be one of the for our stuff at least, it'll be one of the most affordable solutions on the market in the USA. These will sell for $200.
Amazing.
4 spaces.
Yeah.
So nothing else on the market this price. It takes 4 units, heavy, made out of steel, great weight to it, XLR in and out. Can't touch it, baby.
Amazing.
So,
I love it.
I look forward to sharing new news with you, man.
We have to bring some of those because people ask about the housing and stuff, and it makes sense that Zulu has his own also with the small like design stuff. Like it looks so cool. Like the Zulu looks great, and So
thank you.
Okay, Langston, nice talking to you. Talk to you.
You
soon.
too, my man.
Yeah, I'm gonna connect this week, and let's keep doing this, and maybe have a conversation a couple months down the line.
Sure.
Yeah.
Not a problem, my man. Thank you.
Thank you,
Peace.
Langston.